agreement. This article is translated from the original Russian and reads in part, quote, "In the framework of the four-country agreement signed on the 8th of August between Ukraine, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Australia, information on the progress and results of the investigation of the disaster will remain classified." This was confirmed at a briefing in Kiev under the auspices of the Office of the Prosecutor General, Yuri Boychenko. In his words, the results of the investigation will be published once completed only if a consensus agreement of all parties that have signed the agreement prevails. Any one of the signatories has the right to veto the publication of the results of the investigation without explanation. That's a pretty remarkable agreement to be signed in an investigation, an open investigation into a public event, a public disaster that the public has been endlessly fed images and has been paraded before the public as this great outrage. But now the actual investigation into what happened is effectively classified, and unless there is consensus agreement on the report, it can be vetoed by any of its members. Again, just a bizarre finding. And we'll play out the timeline here. August 19th, Russia addresses the UN Security Council and asks, where are the air traffic control records? A very good question that still is a question that remains to be answered. We can pick that up from the eventchronicle.com from August 19th. Russia to Ukraine, Kiev must publish record of MH17 communications with traffic control. This report reads, Kiev should make public the records of communications between the Ukrainian air traffic control and the Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 in the hours before it was shot down over Ukraine's turbulent east, Russia's UN envoy said. The issue was among several Russia raised at a UN Security Council meeting, which was called by Russia to discuss the progress of the investigation into the tragic incident, which killed 298 people in July, Vitaly Churkin said. Moscow sees the shortage of proper evidence known to the public so far as wrong. As far as we know, UN's civil aviation watchdog, the ICAO, is being kept on the sidelines of the investigation, which has been conducted for some time. Again, pretty remarkable that even these basic records are being held back, something that Russia has done its best to bring to the attention of the quote-unquote international community, but because the quote-unquote international community refers to none other than the US and its allies, it is a piece of information that has been shoved down the memory hole. And, air traffic control records? What air traffic control records? And finally, on this timeline, August 21st, the bodies of many of the passengers flown to Malaysia. And there are pictures of them online, including this one here on the video presentation that you're watching. Very stirring images of some of the pallbearers bringing the coffins out from the plane, the transport plane, etc. So obviously all part of that propaganda rollout intended to stir the emotions and get people fired up for a war. But the question, of course, remains what really happened. And, well, there are two stories. There is the official story, and then there's the counter story. So let's look again at the official story, what we are expected to believe. And this is the story, for example, that was propounded within the first couple of days of the actual attack taking place. On July 20th, Secretary of State John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, of course, made the rounds of the Sunday morning talk show circuit. And on those talk shows, he laid out what remains to this point the official story, more or less, of what occurred there or what we're expected to believe. He laid out several points in those talk show appearances, including the fact that, quote, a few weeks ago, we have a 150-vehicle convoy coming from Russia, going into the east of Ukraine with tanks, artillery, multiple rocket launchers, armored personnel carriers, and being turned over to the separatists. The implication, of course, being that the separatists suddenly had all of this military machinery that they were going to make use of, presumably by downing a civilian aircraft. He said they had an SA-11 right in the vicinity hours before this shoot, the SA-11 being a surface-to-air missile launched from, for example, a Buk missile launcher. He said the separatists have shot down 12 aircraft in the last couple of months, among them 2 transport planes, AN-26s, again, that well documented, not really in dispute. I mean, literally, drunken separatist soldiers are piling bodies into trucks unceremoniously and disturbing the evidence and disturbing the pattern that is there. Anything that is removed, and we understand some aircraft parts have been removed, compromises the investigation. again trying to make it look like the crime scene is being tampered with in order to cover up what really occurred there, 9/11. And he noted, "We observed by imagery that at the moment of the shootdown, we detected a launch from that area," i.e. the vicinity of the shootdown, "and our trajectory shows that it went to the aircraft." Again, that's a direct quote from Secretary of State Kerry. "We know with confidence, that the Ukrainians did not have such a system anywhere near the vicinity at that point in time. We have not within the administration made a determination. I've tried cases on circumstantial evidence. It's powerful here. But there are an enormous array of facts that point at Russia's support for and involvement in this effort. Some of the separatist leaders are Russian. Russia has armed the separatists. Russia has supported the separatists. Russia has trained the separatists." All right, not really very difficult to parse what is being said here and what the implications of this are. Obviously, the State Department is trying to make it seem that it is Russia that was ultimately behind this because of their arming, training, supplying, funding, and directing of the separatists in eastern Ukraine. And that is basically the case. Now, the case is backed up by various pieces of evidence. Of course, Kerry referred there to imagery that shows the moment of the shootdown, including the detection of a launch from the area and plotting of the trajectory of that launch that seems to be going directly to the aircraft. But oddly enough, they haven't really showered the media with those images. What they've showered the media with is such things as the Ukrainian government's interception of phone calls that was posted to YouTube the day or two after the events, in which we presumably are listening to the voices of various people in the Ukrainian separatist movement who presumably are talking about this downing of this aircraft and are presumably taking credit or blame for the shoot down. "We have just shot down a plane, Group Minera," supposedly says voice of Igor Bezler. And these are recordings that have been vouched for by the State Department as being authentic, so again, take them for what they're worth. There was some question about the timestamp of the upload to YouTube and the idea that this had been uploaded the day before MH17. That timestamp has been debunked. That it's more to do with the way YouTube processes videos than it is to do with the actual upload date of the video itself. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can take a look at that. That was a conclusion that we came to early on in the open source investigation at CorbettReport.com, that the timestamps are inconclusive at best, and it would be a pretty shoddy job to upload your evidence the day before the actual operation went down. That would be a pretty ridiculous mistake to be making anyway, so I think that's not exactly evidence of anything. But the provenance of these phone calls and what they are actually phone calls recordings of, again, there's no end to what they could be, or how they could be manipulated or tampered with, or simply made up from whole cloth. But then, of course, we have this damning conclusive evidence of a Buk missile launcher, which is clearly being driven by the separatists across the border back into Russia. I mean, how could this video that you're seeing on screen now in the video presentation be any clearer? That is so obviously the Buk missile launcher in question being driven across the Russian border. And how do we know this? Well, it was posted online, so it simply must be true. And we've been told that this is conclusive evidence, so apparently, again, that makes it true. This is the type of evidence that we've seen being posted, along with supposed social media posts by the Ukraine separatists, supposedly taking credit or taking blame for the shoot-down, believing that they had took down a transport plane, but then immediately backtracking on that. But again, all of this evidence that has been presented to us is not the type of telemetry or radar imagery or anything concrete, as we had been told to believe that was on the way. It was this type of evidence. But, well, it's not exactly convincing. This amounts to, as has been pointed out in the press, by some of the press officers who actually are trying to hold some of these minions to the fire, feet to the fire. This is basically social media. And the question is there anything other than social media evidence that we can actually point to that would actually indicate that this was the work of the separatists? And this was a question that was posed in so many words to the U.S. Secretary of State Deputy Spokesperson, Spokesperson Harf at a press conference on July 21st.
How is it exactly that you know that it was fired from Russian from separatist-held territory?
Well, we have a great deal of information that the Secretary laid out yesterday, and I can go back through some of it today. But we do know, first, that Russian-backed separatists were in possession of an SA-11 system as early as Monday, July 14th. This is from intercepts of separatist communications posted on YouTube by the Ukrainian government.
Is there anything other, because,
I can keep going if you want to jump in.
Is there stuff that's other than social media that
Yes, absolutely, there is.
So what is it that's other than social media?
At this point, Matt, we've said what our assessment is, very strong assessment publicly. If there's more information that's based on that we can share, we're happy to do so. We'll continue looking at that. But look, this is what we know as of right now, based on open information, which is basically common sense, right? We know where it was fired from. We know who has this weapon.
Well, I don't know. It's disputed, though. Backed up
by a host of information that we have gathered about who did this, where it came from, and what the weapon system was. So we're just telling you what we know now.
Right.
Well, isn't it interesting that what we know now seems to be based on social media and common sense, quote unquote. So let's compare that type of startling mustering of the facts and presentation of evidence by the US State Department with that Russian press conference that we referred to earlier in the timeline, in which they presented satellite and radar data to make their case for what actually occurred in the downing of MH17.
Russian monitoring systems also registered that there was a Ukrainian Air Force jet, probably an Su-25 fighter, climbing and approaching the Malaysian passenger aircraft. The Su-25 was between 3 and 5 kilometers away from the Malaysian Airlines plane. The fighter jet is capable of reaching an altitude of 10,000 meters for short periods of time. Its standard armament includes R-60 air-to-air missiles, which are capable of locking and destroying targets within a range of 12 kilometers, and which are guaranteed to hit their target from a distance of 5 kilometers. What was a military aircraft doing on a route intended for civilian planes, flying at almost the same time and the same altitude as a passenger airliner? We would like to receive an answer to this question. To corroborate this evidence, we have a video taken at the Regional Air Traffic Control Center in Rostov.
At 17:21 and 35 seconds, with the Boeing's velocity having dropped to 200 kilometers per hour, a new mark detecting an airborne object appears at the spot of the Boeing's destruction. The new airborne object was continuously detected for the duration of 4 minutes by the radar stations at Ust-Donetsk and Batuninskaya. An air traffic controller requested the characteristics of the new airborne object, but was unable to get any readings on its parameters, most likely due to the fact that the new aircraft was not equipped with a secondary surveillance radar transponder, which is a distinctive feature of military aircraft. Detecting this airborne object at an earlier stage was not possible, since our radar sites normally monitor airspace in standard observation mode, which only enables aircraft detection at this range at an altitude of upwards of 5,000 meters. Detecting the new aircraft became possible as it started to ascend. Further changes in the airborne object's coordinates suggest that it was hovering above the Boeing 777 crash site, monitoring the situation. Ukrainian officials earlier claimed that there were no Ukrainian military aircraft in the area of the crash that day. As you can see, that is not true. Thank you.
Well, of course, that's just a small segment of a much larger conference that included a pretty interesting presentation in which they go point by point through the radar data that the Russians were working with. Again, very interesting to take a look at that. And the ultimate conclusion of this, as they say, is that there was a Ukrainian military aircraft that was there on the scene in the exact moments approaching the end moments of MH17, and that did seem to be exactly on a course to come up towards the aircraft, which